All right, I am going live. We'll see if I did this right. Send that out through Slack. And let me open up my chat room on my phone from Twitch here. We're going to call this the week 1 live stream. Save. Ooh, looks like I can save or share this from the app itself. Okay. Live. Okay, we got 0 viewers still.
Upgrade. Inserting shock absorber. Customizing pressure.
Oh, sweet. Christy's in here. Christy, right? Did I remember the name? Sweet. And P Trip 22. Welcome. I'm not going to recognize anybody's name, unfortunately, inside of the Twitch chat room. Oh, wow, we have 6 people already. Lewis, okay. Hey, Patrick. How is everyone doing tonight? FJ Lewis, welcome, welcome. I'm going to get my screen ready here. Oh, Rick, hey. Yeah, no kidding. I drove to Harrison today. Someone commented that the weather is better tonight. I drove to Harrison today, and there were dozens of trees right by the highway down, almost right touching the road. It was crazy on US 10. Oh, looks like Austin is watching the slides right now. I am going to launch the slideshow here. My lights flickered last night during the live stream once or twice, but I think the connection stayed, which was good. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about chapters 1 and 2. And I know this is even more important because the textbook is still missing in action. I know that I sent an email pushing the digital version. I just got a copy of that too, so hopefully I can compare it to the printed version. I know this stream is a bit delayed, but I'm curious if you could indicate if you have the textbook, whether it's the printed one or the digital one, or if you're still waiting for it to arrive. Just mention that in the Twitch channel or in the Twitch chat. That'll help me as I go through this. I'm going to try to jump right in right now. If you hadn't figured out, I'm Brandon Kish. I'm your instructor, and I'm going to talk about what I think are the most important parts of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Chapter 1 is called Getting Started in Web Design, and I think it's a great introduction for people that have worked a little bit in web design, and also for people that have never really worked with web design before. There's a lot to it, and we have to start somewhere. And the second chapter is about how the web works, which I think is really kind of funny. Always the first week of class, we talk about how the internet works. Internet 101. And it just seems funny to me because you guys have been using the internet for much of your life, I'm assuming, at this point. So chapter 1 is all about where to get started with web design. And our author decides to focus first on the roles and kind of the job titles and the responsibilities that many web developers or people that work with web design, those types of responsibilities that they are in charge of in their careers at many points in time. And some of these are very specific roles that are actually seen in job postings, and some of these are shared responsibilities, but it kind of will give you a picture of the multifaceted nature of web design. And then the end of chapter 1 is a little bit about what type of tools are available for web design. And a question that I have been asked before personally from students thinking about taking the class and people thinking about coming to mid is, do I really need a degree if I want to be a web designer? And I'll be the first to tell you that you might not. Employers, for the most part, when they're looking for a web designer, in my experience, they're looking mostly for past experience. They might not see many applicants that actually have a degree in web design or web development. Instead, there's more of an emphasis on example work and building a portfolio. And I know that we have a couple students in the class that are in graphic design, and that's actually a major focus of that program, is to assemble a portfolio. And there's a class, I think it's Art 240, we figured out, that is all about building a portfolio and presenting a portfolio. We actually have a brand new web design certificate that we're launching at the college, and it's going to be offered online just like this class, and it's a subset of a couple web design classes and a couple graphic design classes. The goal of this certificate is to get you something that's equivalent to a certificate or almost like a degree that focuses on web design, but it also is going to be a heavy emphasis on building example work. This class, you're going to be building several projects that you could put in a portfolio if you wanted to demonstrate to someone that you can build a website, whether that's an employer or a prospective client. So I also get many questions from people thinking about taking this class that ask, well, I want to build a website, but I don't want to code. And I do have some bad news for everyone in the stream right now. There's a lot of coding in this class, and I know that can be intimidating. It's not going to be hard. I think you're going to be able to pick up on it right away. We're going to do a lot of activities that will help you become acclimated to working with code. But even if you take this class, I actually have been surprised. There have been a number of graphic design students that will take web design, and I've seen them present their final portfolios, and they'll still sometimes use a tool like Squarespace or WordPress or Wix or Weebly. There's a lot of awesome online tools for building web pages, and now they're very template based. So if there's a template that appeals to you, that's great. But sometimes if you want to customize that website or take that website to the next level, then you really need to have web design skills and a knowledge of how all of this stuff works. So I understand when graphic design students, even some of you, might decide to still use those online tools. I use them. In fact, my wife needed a website, and I pointed her in the direction of Squarespace, and she has made a beautiful website showcasing her talents, and all that is managed on Squarespace. So the right tool for the right job, I say. What I will say is that understanding the code is invaluable. I know that even though my wife uses Squarespace, she also customizes a lot of the HTML and code when she builds web pages. And what I will say is if you want to pursue web design, organizations are going to need you to understand how all of these pieces work together, the different parts of web design, and they're going to want you to have experience working with code. So that's why we're in this class. And I also get a very common question is, are there jobs in web design? So today, when I was finishing these slides, I just went to monster.com and I searched for web design, and I compared no location, just all the jobs that mentioned web design, and there was 16,000 today posted. If you narrow that down to just Michigan, that was 355 jobs posted on monster.com that involve web design. So there are definitely a lot of jobs and opportunities there. There's also a lot of freelance opportunities, even in the local area. Throughout the semester, you'll see me share in Slack companies that have contacted the college looking for someone to help them with a website. And I hope that if I share those, that one of you will consider either applying or pitching them and helping them improve their website. All right, so let's move on to chapter 1. The textbook talks about roles and responsibilities, and I want to go through a few of these. I actually really love this chapter because our author actually leads with content jobs. And I say that content is king. If we didn't have content for a website, there'd be no point in having a website. That's even true of midmich.edu. We have a lot of content, and it's all organized so that our students can find it. When you have a lot of content, you really need to consider the architecture of it, how to organize it, how to group that together, build taxonomies so that you can collect that information and post it in a similar format. A lot of this leads to navigation, and a lot of it leads to how the user experience or the UX of a website will work so that people can actually use your site. And of course, some of that also connects with how the site is designed, the user interface of it. Another aspect or another role related to building content is a content strategy, and this is actually something that I've seen an emphasis on at the for the MidMich website lately. We have a great strategic communications team that is prioritizing writing content in an authentic voice, and it's hot on the heels of our brand new logo and our brand new college name. So we're trying to make sure that all content on the website meets certain criteria that we've established for the brand of Mid-Michigan College. And a lot of that gets really hard if you don't set these rules and structures out ahead of time and plan for what writing is going to look like on your website. Then it's hard to fix that after the fact when you start having a huge number of pages and a huge number of content. And one aspect of content strategy is actually developing a schedule. I know that there's a calendar that our strategic communications team uses to plan out when certain parts of the website need to be updated. And right now, a very big focus is the welcome back week. So I mentioned midmich.edu. I wanted to show two of the most popular types of content that we have tried to organize and that we're still tweaking. On the left-hand side, we have just news announcements. We have a lot of news items and press releases that we publish on our website. So we have defined a certain style and a template for those news postings. And this is actually an area that we're hoping to improve both performance and the design and the ease of publishing. Right now, it takes our team a long time to publish new news articles, and they kind of get buried on our website. There's just one little box that talks about news, and we kind of want the front page to showcase more of that content. So that's an area that is going to be changing and evolving this semester while you are in the class. On the right-hand side, we're actually just finishing up a couple projects about advertising our programs of study and sharing our common pathways, which is our guide through our courses. If you want a degree, we have recommended series of courses, and we've never done a great job of advertising that. So our website is going to be updated in the next couple of weeks to have these pathways on the web. And that's another very important piece of content that I think has been minimized on our website, and it's going to be a huge focus going forward. So that's probably 1/3 of what that chapter talks about in the way of roles and responsibilities. The next major chunk is design. And if you have any questions about the content aspect, please put them in the chat room. I'm just taking a look right now. It looks like a few people said that they have the digital copy. Yep, Rick, I know you wanted to download as a PDF. I'm still trying to tinker with what I can do with that digital copy of the book. Oh, someone got a hardcover. That is awesome. I didn't even know the book was available in hardcover. In fact, I actually have the book that I bought this before summer began because I was thinking about using it for the class. Here, I can switch to video only for a minute. So I have a printed copy of it, and it is already curled on the edges because I've paged through it so often. I really like the printed book. I'm kind of bummed that we weren't able to get them in stock very quickly. The textbook actually replaces a book that was thinner and more expensive, if you can believe that. All right, back to the video. Oh, Susan, I'm sorry you're not a fan of the digital copy. We're going to do our best. Okay, so let's talk about design. I know that many of the people enrolled in this class have a background in design, so I'm very grateful to have so many of you in class this semester. Sometimes I've had all coders, sometimes I've had all graphic designers. I think this semester we have a great balance. So So design, they actually talk about a couple different roles. And I was really hoping that I would find the meme that I've seen going around on Twitter about UX versus UI. But there's a slight differentiation between interaction design and user interface design. The user experience in general, UX is what we call that. That is about the whole experience and the usability and your interactions with the website from the very first page load through all the activities that you need to complete. And so people that are specialists in UX will often observe people just using the website, just watching where they go. There are some really cool tools for this. I once participated at a conference where they were measuring how people use Moodle, the LMS that you're using, and they were making these heat maps. So they actually had this technology that watched your eyes on the web page and watched your mouse. And so we could see where people's attention went right away and where they kind of explored and what areas of the site they didn't use. And then the people that were building and improving Moodle were trying to figure out how the areas that didn't get a lot of attention could be redesigned or moved to be to be part of a user's flow. And sometimes these user experience specialists will actually conduct interviews and build user stories for what a person who is using the website is actually going to be trying to do. And I'm going to take one digression here. So one of my favorite comic strips online is, can't get out of here, is XKCD. How many of you have heard of XKCD before? We printed this out when we were looking at redesigning the mid website. This is a Venn diagram. You're going to see later on that I actually really like Venn diagrams as a tool for understanding and explaining. This is a Venn diagram that shows on the left all of the things that exist on university and college websites. We kind of fall into a lot of that bucket. Photo slideshow, press releases. We're actually building a new virtual tour. So that's the circle on the left. Then the circle on the right is what all of the students are actually looking for. List of faculty phone numbers and names, a calendar, parking information, a usable map. I bet you can still, to this day, request these things for the mid website. And then the only thing, supposedly, that this comic says overlaps is the full name of the school. Now, that's a little bit harsh, but I can tell you as someone who helps maintain a college website that this is pretty accurate. So yeah, I love XKCD. All right, I'm going to close that. Let's get back to some design stuff. So we talked about user experience design. Interaction design is sometimes more on like a granular specific level. Maybe they're not considering the whole experience, but they are going to be focusing on key critical moments and making sure that the interactions, making sure that navigation, making sure that the flow through a specific aspect of the website is delightful, easy to use, and intuitive. One area that might be more commonly associated with like app design or software design is the user interface. But the simple truth of the matter is that even websites are very complicated apps these days. If you come to our website and you're trying to register for classes, I think you'd probably attest that we need a better user interface for browsing our list of courses and registering for them. So that a lot of user interface design is focused on the function. Think about how buttons, menus, links, and those pieces are organized so that you can use them. And I don't mean to discredit what you might be thinking of graphic design or the visual graphic design. That's a huge component. Generating a website requires logos. It requires photography. It requires assets to be prepared for common design elements. So actually, one thing that we actually do have a specialized person for at the college is a graphic designer. And they were instrumental in making a mock-up of what our new website was going to look like. And they came up with, I think, at least a dozen different new logo possibilities before we settled on the new Mid-Michigan College logo. So when you're thinking about design, you can think about these deliverables. These are the things that designers who work with web design are going to be producing. We talked about the user research and the testing reports, but there's also some more tangible deliverables like wireframe diagrams. We're going to have the opportunity to create some wireframe diagrams later on in the semester, and I think I have a screenshot in the next slide. Creating site diagrams. I talked about the mock-up that our graphic designer made. I couldn't find it when I was looking through my notes. I was trying to include some screenshots. I'm going to keep looking for that because I think it's pretty cool what our mock-up looked like before the final website was launched. And storyboards and user flowcharts through a website. So this is an example of a flowchart. It's not pretty, but we had a very lengthy discussion about how people were going to browse our list of courses. And so you can kind of make out where there's a list of art classes and a list of portfolio things, and how people would go from the program on the left to browse into the specific program, get a list of the courses, and then see a list of outcomes from each course. We have whiteboards all around our offices, and we'll often make flowcharts for how all of the pieces of our website or web app will fit together. When we talk about sitemaps, this is a very traditional look at a sitemap, where you're making an outline, grouping the content that fits together into sections. You might think that our website fits into this traditional sitemap model, but we actually have a lot of pages that don't fit in the navigation bar but are linked to on a regular basis. And you can actually make sitemaps a bunch of different ways. This was how we actually built it was more like an outline or a hierarchy of content when we were building the current mid website. This was our draft architecture just for the About MMCC area, where we had a list of our accreditation, our programs, and our mission underneath the college governance. So that was design. I need to get to coding, because coding is actually a major focus of our course and of our textbook. There are several specialties when it comes to web design and web development. The most common difference between these is whether it's front-end development or back-end development. Front-end development refers to anything that has to do with the client or the web browser, and it's actually a focus of this website. It covers HTML, the hypertext markup, and how you structure a web page. We're also going to be working with CSS styling and appearance, and it also covers JavaScript interactivity. So when you click on things in the browser and various things happen, menus expand, animations happen, working with a form that submits, all of that is kind of client side. But there's also a specialty that has to do with back-end development, and I get a lot of students in the class that will ask me for back-end content. What I will say is Web 2 strikes more of a balance between front-end development and back-end development. This introduction to web design focuses almost entirely on front-end development. So what is back-end development? Well, you still need to interface with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but we're actually kind of adding another layer to this. So if someone is filling out a form on a web page, is typing into a search box or filling out a registration form, what happens when you click submit? That's where the back-end development happens, where the information is then sent to a server and something happens on the server, whether you're added to a database or an email gets sent, or you search an index to find the content that they were looking for. That back-end development is usually done with special scripting programming languages. The most popular ones I think right now are PHP, Ruby, .NET. There are some server-side JavaScript libraries that are very popular. Node.js is a very popular one. We're gonna talk a little bit about some PHP projects and open source solutions in Web 2. So what's an example of front-end versus back-end? I actually took one project at the college, our admissions app, which I'm sure a few of you actually probably filled out. I think this admissions app has been live for almost 3 or 4 years, so maybe all of you have actually filled it out. But on the left-hand side is the form. We used HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to make this web page. And you'll see that as you type in like your first name, your legal first name, and then you put your preferred first name, we have some JavaScript that is watching those fields. And as you type them in, you can see that the bottom part here is like a fake student ID card. We actually show a preview of what your name is going to look like, because we're trying to make sure that people realize that they can, put their more common nickname into that field, and that's what instructors are going to see on the first day of class. So that was all done with front-end HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But when you fill out this application form, a lot of stuff happens behind the scenes. I took a screenshot of some of that code. We built the admissions application in Ruby on Rails. So Ruby is the language. When an entry is created, we will actually do some validation to make sure that they filled out all the right fields. We will collect the IP address of where they came from. And if you scroll down through this page, you would actually see where it sends an email that says, "Welcome, thank you for applying." And it will send all the information, including an encrypted social security number, to our primary student information system. All that happens on the back end. So I hope that covers front end versus back end pretty well. I'm going to take a quick break here, and if you have questions about the coding or the design or the content roles, put them in the chat room and I'll address them here. I think Rick said that Moodle needs a better color palette. For me, it's just one giant wall of bland text and neutral hues. I can see that. We actually had a different theme for Moodle probably only 2 or 2.5 years ago, and it was an overwhelming amount of blue. We went back to the default clean, simple theme, and some of it's much more legible, I'll say, but I do see where it gets pretty bland, and if you're studying late at night, it's a lot of white. Maybe just a dark mode would be nice. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room, so I'm going to move on. Oh no. There's my unicorn. Okay, front end versus back end. Do you have to choose one or another? You don't. There's a cool word in the chapter. They call them unicorns, and you can be a unicorn. If you want to work on the whole stack, you want to be a whole stack developer, you want to do front end work and back end work, you can learn both. In fact, I would argue that a lot of smaller institutions need both. We can't afford to have front end specialists and back end specialists, so everyone that's on my programming team does work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and is just as comfortable working on some of the back end technologies. So I think it's funny that it's called a unicorn. Just know that wherever you're going to be working, you're probably going to have to dabble in a lot of technologies and wear multiple hats. And that's kind of the point of this section. I wanted to make sure that you're aware of the different roles and responsibilities that you're going to have when you're working in web design, and see that that might be a whole spectrum of tasks that you would be working with. There is a kind of like a grab bag of other roles that I thought I would mention. In order to make a website launch and to keep the trains running on time, you might need other types of people involved in the project. And so there are roles like a product manager who makes sure that whatever is being developed is actually aligned with the business objectives. This is probably more common on a bigger company project, or like I think of like Apple and Google. They have many product managers that are in charge of specific functions or pieces of software, and they make sure that it's aligned with the bigger company goals. And then there's probably smaller versions of that, like project managers, coordinator roles. This is kind of like the role that I serve as the lead of our programming team. I'm making sure that we keep everything moving on time. We consider our timelines, make sure that we're hitting our milestones and delivering the pieces when we need, and just trying to wrangle a couple people's schedules to all work on the same project so that it can ship on time. A role that's become way more popular than I ever dreamed it would be is a search engine optimization specialist. There is a huge emphasis on this because being on that very first page of Google results is required. If you're not showing up, if your content is not showing up in Google or on a search engine, it's like you don't even exist. Now, search engine optimization kind of has branched out. Now it's not simply enough to be found by Google, but if people are sharing your content on Facebook or on Twitter, you want to make sure that when they share your website, that the little preview that gets put on someone's wall or on Twitter actually summarizes the page and has the right image show up. Like, there's a lot of people that experiment with like A/B testing where they'll have 50% of people see this image or this design and 50% see it this way, and they try to figure out what's more popular with Facebook or on social media. So there's like a blossoming industry around search engine optimization, and it's something that we don't really have a lot of experience with at Mid, so we've actually contracted with some marketing firms in the past that will help us analyze our website and understand if we are running ads that are appropriate, how our ads are performing, how our ranking in the search results for education in the Mount Pleasant and Harrison and Mid Michigan region is working. And of course, there's a lot of cool multimedia on websites these days. So whether that's video, audio, games, some other interactive animations, or even something like Twitch. The fact that we can embed a Twitch stream on a website is just mind-blowing to me still. I think I said yesterday, if you watched the live stream, that I actually learned about Twitch in my web design class because someone embedded their Twitch channel on their webpage, and when they were presenting it in front of the class, they had someone at their apartment playing, and it like seriously it just blew my mind. And so that's what kind of got me into Twitch. Okay, so let's move into tools of the trade, and I am going to take a quick look at the chat room again. Yep, Unicorn is a cute name. Thanks, Emma. Rick said that he had no idea .NET was a language. He knew it was something for Microsoft. Yeah, because you've probably gotten the updates for .NET along the way and not known what it was used for. .NET is actually like a framework or a set of tools that you can use to build back-end applications. And .NET is actually really huge. You can use it for building software, but they have like a subset of it that is great for making web applications and websites. In fact, when I worked at CMU, their development team, all .NET. That's all they worked with was .NET. All right, tools of the trade. What do you need to be a web designer? I'd already posted my syllabus, and it made me wonder if I should have put this in the syllabus, because I hope everyone has a computer that they can use for building some web pages. You can make web pages from a tablet or from a phone, but I think it would be pretty painful. If you're going to be doing web design for your job, you definitely need a computer that you can run a couple apps at once. You're going to definitely need to be able to run an editor, a couple browsers. You might be looking up videos like lynda.com. So having a modern computer is going to be important. The most critical aspect of it is having a big monitor. You're going to have code up, and you're going to have the results of the code up. So you're going to see how, when I demonstrate next week building your very first web page, you'll see that because I have this small screen so you can see it in the stream, I'm going to have to like tab between two windows and then hit refresh in between them. If you can have the code and the web page up side by side on one monitor, that makes a huge difference. Having one computer might not be enough. If you have a Mac, you are definitely going to want to see what your website looks like running on a PC. And if you're on a PC, you're probably going to want to see what it looks like on a Mac. So a lot of web designers will have two computers on their desk. And that actually has not changed from when I first started doing web design in the early 2000s. I was one of the few people that used the Mac on their desk more than the PC on their desk at first. Mobile devices. Oh my gosh. In Web 2, I have a graphic that I put inside of the Moodle shell in the first week when we talk about testing on mobile devices. It's not going to be a huge focus this semester. We are going to make sure that you test your site out in a few different places, but having one phone isn't even enough these days, because our admissions application, we found out, I showed that screenshot earlier on, the client side validation that we had that made sure that you typed in your birth date in the right format didn't work on an old Android phones. We had no idea. Someone called the college and said that they weren't able to apply, and we eventually figured out that part of what we had written just wasn't working on some Android phones. So having a lot of different devices is going to be a reality for web designers. So the textbook lists scanner and camera, and I think that's because there's actually a nice chapter on image asset production, taking high resolution photos and making them ready for the web is important. I have a lot of students that will make a photo gallery, and unfortunately it takes forever to load when they're not opening it up on their computer. When they're actually looking at it during the final presentation, they'll see the images load slowly. So there's a good chapter on how to prepare those images for the web. But what I think is probably more important than having a scanner or a professional DSLR camera for this class is just having a phone. You can take some amazing photographs with a phone. So I think that'll be sufficient. Software. I'm going to save a lot of the software discussion for next week. We're going to talk about some text editors next week that will help you. Software that you might need for producing image assets. You've probably heard of Photoshop. There's also a free software called GIMP that's pretty nice. And the most important piece of software that you will be using this semester are web browsers. And I think we're all talking a little bit about what our favorites are in the journal this week. I use them all. In fact, last year my class kind of made fun of me because I was preaching the joys of the new Firefox design. I love the new top tabs. I think they look amazing. But then Firefox was mean to me for like a couple weeks this summer and was really slow and kept crashing. And I love Safari. I really do love Safari because at least on my Mac laptop, it has the best performance battery-wise of any of the browsers, but it kept crashing on me. So currently, I think I mentioned this, I am using Chrome again, which feels weird. It's been a couple years since it was my main browser. But I have to say, when I'm on a PC, I really like Edge as well. So if you only use one browser, you're going to want to try using a couple this semester. And I have a hot tip. You may experience times where you want to be logged in with 2 accounts at once, but you have a favorite browser. In fact, I'm noticing a lot of people that are trying to access some of the Google Docs that I've posted, and they're trying to access them with their personal Google account. You're going to have to log in with your mid account for that. And if you want to use Chrome, you can actually be logged into 2 different accounts at once if you use the incognito feature. So this is my hot tip for you. If you're ever working or testing a site and you worry that something is cached or you're logged in with the wrong account, open up a private window or an incognito window. They probably like have a darker appearance. It's supposed to keep your history, from being saved and prevent ad tracking and some other things. But like this feature is really good for web developers to be able to open up a website multiple times. So that's my special bonus tip. And I'm seeing some people mention Firefox in the chat room. Emma asked a great question. Is the scale of monitors something you have to take into account with web design as well? Yes. In fact, because web designers and developers have these beautiful 27-inch or bigger displays, a lot of the mock-ups that I see when I work with designers are meant for big desktop screens. And actually what you want to keep in mind is that the content you're building is going to be viewable more often than not on a screen this size. So yes, screen size is something you need to take into consideration. And I think it's more well known these days that you're going to have to make your design flexible. It's called responsive design, and that's a topic that we talk about in Web 2. So I look forward to talking with you about that maybe next semester. Rick said that he uses Chrome and Opera. It used to be great, but the quality has fallen off a little. Opera actually kind of threw in the towel. They used to build their own rendering image, and I'm going to mention, or their own rendering engine, and I'm going to mention that in a little bit on another slide. But now I've heard that Opera really is just kind of a clone of Chrome with some more features on top. How do they handle image scaling for those websites? So you're talking about if there is a website that you want to be viewable on a big monitor with a big photograph, but you also want it to load quickly on a small phone. Yeah, the way there are lots of approaches to that. I'm going to talk about the W3C, which sets standards for browsers. There's a new feature where you can actually specify 3, 4, 5 different images, and the browser will load whichever image is more appropriate for the screen size that's viewing it. So we'll talk about that later. All right, chapter 2, how the web works. I love this topic because everyone uses the word internet and web interchangeably, but there is a small, slight, and important difference between these. The web and the web pages that you browse kind of represent like a small subset of the whole internet. And we used to talk in computer classes a long time ago about really off-the-wall other protocols like Gopher, Telnet. But there are better examples these days of other content on the internet that's not really on the web. So I think about streaming services like Netflix and Hulu, and I think about apps that you use, things like Twitch where I'm doing this live stream. Yes, it might appear in a web page, but it might also be in an app. So really the protocol that might be used for sending that data back and forth might not be a web page. So I associate the web, this small circle on the screen here, with the HTTP protocol, which is how we transmit HTML documents. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and the reason I associate it with web pages is because you see it when you are looking in a browser at the very top of the screen, when you're looking at the URL bar. Every web page has a URL. So when we're working with browsers and we're working with URLs, we are talking about the web. And that is kind of like a smaller subset of the greater internet. Because the internet really, when you think about it, it's just a network of computers. The fact that we can send email back and forth between computers happens over the internet. But when I am talking about the web, I'm talking about using a browser to be able to browse web pages. Rick, you said the internet is a series of tubes. You stole that line from Al Gore and from me. I used to talk about that a lot. And yes, it is full of cats these days. Okay, so a very important concept that I think our textbook does a very good job of covering is the difference between clients and servers. The author actually talks about like the flow of what happens when you try to visit a website, how it uses DNS to find the IP address and to download the web page. I'm going to simplify that. I'm going to have this dividing line and say clients and browsers request web pages from web servers. So for instance, let's say I type in midmich.edu. The browser is going to find the right server to communicate with and yell at the server, I need midmich.edu, the front page. The web server is going to prepare the web page, is going to send an HTML web page, that's this little dotted outline, send it back to the web browser. That's going to reference images, it's going to reference some style sheets, it's going to reference a bunch of different files. All of that gets downloaded by the browser, and it becomes the web page that you see every day. We mentioned Opera and Chrome a minute ago. I like to talk about how there's a lot of different browsers and they have more in common than you might think. Chrome has an engine in the background called Blink that is open source. Safari has something called WebKit built into it. And Firefox has a rendering engine called Gecko. Now we know Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. These are the names of the browsers. These are built by companies. They're proprietary. These browsers that are shipped for the platforms, the computers that we use, are proprietary. But underneath, they share code in an open source community that can be modified and used by anyone. These are the rendering engines, the things that actually translate the code that you're going to be writing next week into the web page that you've been seeing up until now. That has to be interpreted and very quickly turned into a visual element on a web browser, and sometimes if it's a screen reader, read aloud. That happens through the rendering engine. So underneath all three of these very popular browsers are open source projects that anyone can find the code for, can make their own copy of, can improve, and then contribute back. So I think it's great that these open source technologies have been bundled inside of these popular apps. The apps themselves are not completely open source, but I am grateful that at least all the browsers are free. Chrome and Safari, I love both of them. They actually have a shared history, which I like to bring up at this time of the semester. Safari has been around for like 15 years now, might be a bit more than that. And it started out, WebKit was actually a fork of another project called KHTML, I think it was. So they took this open source project, forked it, which means make a copy of it, and they started developing it on their own, and they open sourced it so many people could contribute. Google decided shortly after Apple that they wanted to have their own browser. So they took WebKit and they started contributing to it, and they made their own browser around it. But Safari and Chrome both were exactly the same, had exactly the same rendering engine underneath, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, unfortunately, Apple and Google decided that they wanted to prioritize different technologies. Safari, for instance, is very keen on privacy features and is very keen on battery power. I think that kind of is because Apple started developing the iPhone and iPad, and those have really tiny batteries in them. So Apple really prioritized power savings. And Chrome kind of took the alternate path. Google builds really complicated web applications like Google Drive and Google Docs, and collaboration tools and video conferencing systems, and they wanted to have a lot of bells and whistles and bleeding edge web technologies built in. So there came a point where the teams kind of split, and now we have Blink and WebKit, which have a shared history and a shared foundation, but they have started to diverge quite drastically over the years. And Rick had mentioned Opera. Opera gave up building their own rendering engine because they're used. A lot of people would test to make sure a website worked well in Safari and Chrome, but very few people ever tried to test in Opera. So Opera decided that what they were going to focus on was the experience, the app that used the rendering engine, and so they threw out what they had been building for decades, and they have now switched to the same rendering engine that Chrome uses, which is Blink. So this semester, and I have to pop out of here again because my emoji aren't showing up. I love emoji. Here we are. This semester, you're going to be working with what I call as the trinity of web design technologies. Next week, we're going to start practicing coding in HTML, which is a markup language, to build very boringly designed web pages. Within 2 weeks of that, we're going to switch to cascading style sheets, which is another language that lets you write styles that get applied to HTML. So we're going to start in HTML and we're going to move to CSS. So you're going to be in the middle between HTML and CSS. On the left-hand side, you're going to learn to build the content of web pages, and on the right, you're going to learn how to make them look attractive. By the end of the semester, we're going to learn a little bit about JavaScript so that you can actually add some interactivity on your website. And so in the middle of this Venn diagram, it's going to be you, my class. We are going to be dabbling in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you will be able to put all three on your resume. So let's start with HTML. What exactly is a markup language? Well, when you boil it down to its essence, HTML and markup languages are just special sets of words or phrases that will indicate where different parts of a document are located, the structure of a document. So an example of that I have on the screen is this paragraph tag. Right here, this is a tag. It looks kind of special. We're going to talk about that more next week. And it goes all the way to the end right here. Well, a browser, when it's reading this code, it realizes that, hey, this is a paragraph, so I should display it on its own line. And I should print out the words, this is a paragraph. So really all that HTML in a markup language is an agreed upon set of tags and characters that represent where the pieces of a document are. How do you decide what these tags and these pieces of markup are going to be? Well, that's thankfully not our job. That's the job of the World Wide Web Consortium. We call it the W3C. You're going to hear me talk about the W3C a lot. They are the body, and it's made up of a lot of different representatives from companies, a lot of open source people, people that were part of the foundation of the internet. They try to figure out what the standards should be, and then they will produce a specification. It is then up to the browser makers, the Google, the Apple, the Microsoft of the world, to actually make that work in their browser. Now, back when we think about like the older times of the internet, when web pages didn't work in one browser or another, oftentimes it was because the W3C had written a specification that was really open to interpretation, and the W3C may not have provided examples. And so each browser maker had to decide how to implement that part of the standard, and we had differences. These days, I think it's a lot better. I think for the most part, the W3C has gotten better about picking what they want to be standard, communicating how it should be a standard, and providing examples. And browser makers are heavily motivated to make sure that their browsers on whatever devices are going to make web pages work relatively the same. There are still key differences that we'll notice along the way, but for the most part, when the W3C sets the standard, it's safe to say that browser makers will follow. So I think at this point, I would like to do one of the exercises from Chapter 2 that you have to do for class this week. This is the view source activity. So what I'm going to demonstrate is how I would view the source for the Mid-Michigan College website. So I'm going to click on this link right here, midmich.edu. And if we think about what's happening, when I type in midmich.edu, it is going out to the internet, figuring out what server is associated with midmich.edu. .edu is that top level domain for universities and colleges. And when it's directed to our server at the college is going to send back a web page and a bunch of images to go along with it. The cool thing is that over that communication, my computer actually gets a copy of all the code necessary to show the website. You see the results of that right here, but you can take a look under the covers, and we're going to do this a lot over the semester. If you go up to the View menu inside of Chrome, and on the PC, that might be buried underneath the ... menu in the top right. You can go to View, Developer, View Source. And just like that, you are looking at the HTML, the markup of our web page. There's a lot going on in here. Some of it is going to make no sense whatsoever. But what I'd like to show you is how you can find pieces of it that do make sense. Let's look for register now for fall semester in the code. And if you're used to shortcuts on the Mac, you can actually hit Command F. Or I think if you go underneath Edit, there's a Find menu. So I'm going to type in Find, and I'm going to look for, register now with a space. So that jumped me down. Look where it jumped me down to. I'm over halfway through the code before we even get to the register now for fall. But right here, it looks like there's a sentence that says register now for fall semester. And it's surrounded by what looks to be an A tag. And above that, there's this H3 tag. We're going to learn all about these tags next week. But look at this. You can read through all of this code for yourself. That's a really powerful discovery. And what I want to show you is that you can do that in more than one browser. Allow me to click over on my copy of Safari. I am going to go to midmich.edu. If it will load for me today. And Safari also has a view source feature. It's buried underneath a develop menu. And it's called show page source right here. Now, if you don't have the develop menu, see, it's going to pop up the source code right here. The same thing is available. I can search in here and find the same content. What I will say is that develop menu might be hidden by default for you Mac users. Underneath the Safari menu in the top left, there's a preferences section. And way over underneath advanced is where the develop menu option is. So I had to turn that on the first time for me to see the develop menu. Okay, so we've done two browsers. We've done Chrome, we've done Safari. If I go to Firefox, let's let Firefox bounce open here in a minute. And it looks like my Firefox opened on the wrong screen. Hold on a second. Here we go. Let's bring that up. I'm going to go to midmich.edu. Let the web page load. And in Firefox, it's located somewhere different. It's underneath the Tools menu, Web Developer, and where is my view source? Page source, there it is, towards the bottom. So Tools, Web Developer, Page Source, and that opens it up in a new tab. And here you go. Here's our web page code. And I can search for the register now. And here it is. The same code shown in 3 different browsers. So I hope that you will find a web page and either record a video of yourself showing how to view the source or take some screenshots. And I would like you to kind of read through some of that source code and try to point out anything that looks interesting to you. You can do what I did and find something that's on the page and then try to locate it in the source code. And I think that would be a good activity for you to complete. So I'm going to take a look in the chat room. Someone mentioned that they were surprised that their URL was actually starting with HTTPS. And actually, that's pretty common now, actually. So midmich.edu as well, our URL starts with HTTPS as well. We're almost to the part of the presentation where I'm going to talk about URLs, so I'll explain what HTTPS means versus HTTP in just a little bit. Thanks for that question, Rick. And it is already 8:53, so I am almost done. Let's jump ahead here. We'll get to the URL stuff. When you visit a web page, if you try to visit midmich.edu/fake page, you might, as you can expect from that URL, you might find that that page doesn't actually exist. So you'll see our beautiful 404 page. And I'm sure you've heard of this before, right? You've heard of 404s? Well, what happens when a web server receives a request for a page that it knows nothing about is it might return a web page still, but it's also going to send around this status code, which is going to indicate to the browser something special. In the case of not found, the agreed upon status code is 404. And it kind of means, hey, this isn't the file that you requested. I couldn't find that. This is something instead. So when you're in that flow of accessing a web page and something comes back, it might not be what you're expecting. So I wanted to share a list of the status codes because I find them pretty informative. Anything that is a 200 level code, like 200 especially, or there's a couple variations of 200, that means that the request was successful. A 300 level status code, when a browser makes a request for something like midmish.edu/scholarships, I hope that's a real URL, the server is going to come back and say, actually, that doesn't exist at this URL. You probably mean midmish.edu/financial aid/scholarships. And so it'll send back a 302 status code and the URL that the person should be taken to. A 400 level status code usually represents an error. That's where like 404 comes from. So not found is an example. I have a few more on the next slide. And then 500 is actually a server-side error. So it means that something bad happened server-side. There's nothing the browser can do about it. We're just going to print out this error message. And I can show an example of that sometime during semester 2. I'm sure we'll break something on the Midmish website. And I can show you that our error page. So the most common status codes that were discussed in the chapter and are listed on Wikipedia are 200, which means A-OK, here's the web page you requested. 301 and 302 are very close to each other. 301 means, hey, the thing you're looking for does not exist here. You mean this other website. If you ever try to go to midmish.edu/scholarships, you really should go to the other one instead. 302 is more of a temporary. It means, hey, go to this other place instead, but maybe ask me again later for that content, and I might give you a different answer. 400, 401, 403 are variations of errors that I run into a lot. 400 might mean that something's not right with how you requested the web page. A very good example of that is if you're trying to visit a form, like a form that you're filling out like our admissions app, and you hit refresh while you're writing it or right after you save. You might get a 400 error code. You've probably seen a 401 error page if you get signed out of Moodle. If you try to request a page like the Moodle shell that we're using in class or the Slack channel and you are not logged in, like you got logged out, your browser will be sent a 401 status code, which means you're not logged in. You should go log in. Forbidden might be that you're logged in, but you don't actually have permissions to what you're looking at. 404 we talked about. I listed all these status codes just so I could get to code 418 because it was put into the standard as a joke. I'm a teapot. They wrote in the specification that this should be returned by teapots that are requested to brew coffee. Return an error that says, hey, I'm a teapot, not a coffee pot. Well, it turns out that like any joke is going to probably become serious eventually because now with the Internet of Things, I'm pretty sure that there is a teapot out there connected to the Internet that someone is going to ask for coffee from, and it can say with a serious face, I'm a teapot. Okay, so we talked about URLs, we talked about status codes, we talked about how browsers work. It is time for the main event, the URL dissection challenge. I wanted to demonstrate the power of a couple URLs. So I am going to switch over to a website that I read a lot. It's a technology commentary website. And it's a blog, pretty much, so I'm going to zoom some of this up here. He comments, John Gruber writes about Apple and other technology companies, and he's been writing this blog for, I think, over a decade now. What I love about this is he collects interesting articles, and then sometimes he actually writes his own articles about things as well. So I'm going to take an example of an article that he wrote about the iPhone shake to undo feature. Apparently it was proposed as a joke, and it kind of was shipped. And now there's nothing else but a shake to undo something on an iPhone. He wrote this article, and if you click on it, you will be taken to a page that just contains the article. So there is a URL associated with this web page. And the reason I care so much about URLs is because they're kind of in jeopardy right now. I want, in my world, in the internet that I have grown up with and the web pages that I've used, I expect that if I copy this URL and I pasted it into Slack, that you would get taken to the exact article. It's kind of the foundation of how our web pages work. Let's take a look at what that URL is made up of. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to switch over to a text editor, paste it in. What I want to point out is that pieces of it are broken up by slashes. I'm going to break it up here on the slash marks. This first component gets back to a question that Rick had. This is the protocol right here. When I early on in the slideshow, I mentioned that to me the internet is HTTP. It's that transfer protocol to send HTML back and forth. When it was first developed, it was called HTTP. That was before the age of Amazon, before we were doing e-commerce on the web. As soon as we decided to start sending credit card information and bank information over the internet, it became very important that we start encrypting our traffic, and that's where they made a new version of the protocol called HTTPS. And as you might guess, the S stands for secure. We're going to talk about this more towards the end of the semester about why HTTPS is pretty important, but suffice it to say that if the internet really is a series of tubes, you probably don't want just anyone to be able to read your credit card when it's sent right through one of those tubes. So HTTPS stands for secure. So this is the protocol. All the URLs to web pages are going to start out with HTTP or HTTPS. The next part is the fully qualified domain name. This is the name that I would want to type in that gets associated with the website. Now, a lot of times that will include www. This is a convention from the early days where you might have a World Wide Web website, you might have an email website, and so they would create what are called subdomains that are still associated with the company or the organization that owns the domain name, but they're allowed to host multiple services. Can anyone, I know that there's a delay here, but can anyone think from mid of some examples of subdomains that we have at the college? This is where I hope that I'm still streaming. I see that a couple people are talking in the chat room. Wow, we have 12 viewers in here right now. That's awesome. The email redirect. Oh yeah, okay. Christy, Moodle. You mentioned Moodle. Absolutely. Moodle's the best example. So we actually host a lot of different sites at Mid. If I start typing in moodle.midmish, the front page of Moodle and all of our Moodle shells are hosted at moodle.midmish.edu. Another one that you might be familiar with at Mid is MidWeb. That is a separate system. Oops, I got an error message there. We have a separate set of software that lets people register for classes. That's maintained by a vendor, so it's midweb.midmish.edu. It's not the same thing as our website. It's running on different servers, in fact. So we use a subdomain to host it. Someone mentioned the bookstore. That's a great example. Susan, the bookstore isn't even located. I know the bookstore is located on campus, but the bookstore website where you order that digital copy or your printed book, we don't even host that on the college network. That actually is hosted by a company, I think, in Nebraska. And so we were able to associate bookstore.midmish.edu with a server somewhere else on the internet. And they host and handle all the credit card processing there. So yeah, those are some very good examples of subdomains, all at Mid. Now, there's another example of subdomains that I like to mention now because I had everyone sign up for Slack in MMCC web class.slack.com. So a very common use of subdomains is for a company that lets people sign up for their own part of the service. So I signed up for a Slack team. In order for you to access it, they gave me MMCC web class as like our channel name or our team name, and then the rest of it is hosted by them, slack.com. So that is an example of subdomains. If you wanted to purchase a domain name, which is one of the activities that you are completing this week, you would have to go to a company like Hover, or Two Cows used to sell domains. GoDaddy still sells domain names. There's a lot of services out there that will let you buy them. You are generally looking for a place that will sell either .coms or .orgs or a lot of really fun new ones like .plumbing, .wedding, and now I feel like I'm just making them up, but I think all these are real. Those .coms, .nets, .plumbing, those are all top-level domains. Those were decided by another organization called ICANN, which is some sort of consortium of names and numbers. They determined what those top-level domains are, and actually when the internet began, I worked at a school district, Midland Public Schools, .k12.mi.us. This is what URLs used to look like at the time. When ICANN first started, they established top-level domains for each of the countries. So there's lots of different country codes out there, like .co.uk, .de for Germany. And a lot of these top-level domains first got started with countries deciding how they would be distributed. And I think some of the top-level domains like .ly are actually country codes, but then they decided that they wanted to start selling domains. So Bitly, which is like a URL shortener that takes a really long URL and turns it into something shorter, like a bit.ly/something, that came from a company. I forget who .ly is. Let's search for it. ly country code. So ly is Libya. So Libya decided that they would start letting anyone purchase a domain name from their top-level domain. Yeah. So in the chat room, people are giving some more examples of country codes. So it seems like everyone's pretty comfortable with that. So when you add together the pieces of the domain name, the top-level domain, this domain name, the subdomain, that's how you get the fully qualified domain name. That's how, and I think I wrote this in the dissection activity, that I like to think of that as the URL that you would type, or the thing that you would type to get the front page of that service. So you type in moodle.midmish.edu, that is going to take you to Moodle at Mid. If you type in midweb.midmish.edu, that's going to take you to midweb. Who owns midweb.midmish? midmish.edu. So that's why it's called a subdomain. So those pieces all together are the fully qualified domain name. That kind of answers the who of like who owns the website. The rest of the details here are really specific to what you're looking for. When you're going to be building your website later on, you're going to learn how to create folders and web pages within folders, and that's going to correlate directly to this directory path. So this /2018, if I type, I wonder if this is right. If I type in daringfireball.net/2018, I'm going to take a guess that I'm going to be able to see a list of all the 2018 articles that he's published. And lo and behold, that's what it's doing. If I grab the part of the URL that's 2018/08, let's see if I get all the August articles. It certainly looks like I do. If I wanted to get directly to this one article, though, I have to put together the whole URL. So shake to undo is added to the end of the URL. So all of this counts as the directory. The examples that you might be seeing will also sometimes include a file extension. The .html is usually, that's not good, is usually expected to be there at the end of it. So .html, it looks like his URL actually does a redirect to get rid of the .html every time I type it in. But this is like the file extension that is most commonly associated with the web pages that you're going to be building and creating. All right, so how do you complete your URL dissection challenge? Well, I have posted a link in Moodle. Let me go to week 1. I'll go down to the dissection challenge. Inside this assignment, I have the steps that you're going to be doing. You're going to open up this Google presentation. There's some directions on here. There's also a slide where I have created a template. So the directions are here. Here is my instructor example. I took a web page at midmish.edu, the one for our current students page, and I listed out all the pieces here. I expect that you will take slide 4 and duplicate it. So you can probably right click on the slide and go to duplicate slide, or if you go to insert, maybe it's underneath the edit. Yeah, the edit menu has a duplicate option for duplicating the slide. Then it looks like a few people, like Todd has already done his. He put his name in here, he pasted his URL in, and he found all the pieces of it and labeled them in the slide. So that is what I'm requesting you to do. I want you to figure out what protocol is being used, figure out what subdomain is being referenced, if any. Maybe there is no subdomain. Figure out what the domain name is, what the top level domain name associated with that is. Piece those together back to get the fully qualified domain name. List any of the paths, and then the document, which is the last piece. So that is the assignment. URLs are super important. I kind of said that they were important, that they're under attack. Daring Fireball is a great example of someone who cares about these URLs, but even on our own website, we have so many redirects in place, and Google, especially in an effort to speed up the web, they have started hosting copies of articles and news articles so that you'll actually see google.com as the URL, and then at the end will be a couple slashes and some characters that represent that it's coming from the New York Times. But Google's hosting it, and I think that that's not cool, because if I copy and paste the URL, I'd hope that it would take you to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times article. So URLs are very important. We are beginning the semester talking about them, and we're going to end the semester when you are publishing your own website, uploading it to a web server, making sure that you can type in a URL to get to your website on our shared Midmish server that you will have access to, and making sure that as you browse your website, all of your links work. And the fact that we talked about HTML and .html as a file extension is going to be very important on the very last day of class when you upload your site. So I promise that what we worked on today is going to carry through, and I'm glad that you were able to join me for this very first live stream. I'm sorry it went over an hour. I do not intend for these to be so long. I will do my best to try to keep them shorter demonstrations of activities instead of lectures like this. But I think this week was a rarity because of the textbook crisis of fall 2018. So I'm going to hang around another minute. If you have any questions about the activities, if you want me to show anything, please post them in the chat room. So Rick was saying that he had problems opening the slides. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you were trying to open them with. You should have been able to work on them right in the browser. So you don't have to download a PowerPoint slide at all. You can actually just use Chrome or whatever browser you're using to access the document. And if you're logged, you have to be logged in with your Midmish account. That might be something that tripped you up. I know a few students tried to take a look at this document with their personal Gmail account, and the sharing settings require that you use a Midmish account. But then you're just in the web browser, and you should be able to find the template slide, right click, and duplicate it to create your own. Okay, so Rick's saying that he had downloaded it and tried to open it up. So yeah, I think that did make it more complicated. If you've already created it in PowerPoint, you might be able to just come in here and create the slide and copy and paste your wording over. Oh, you said yours is in here. Let me scroll through here. So Steven, Alyssa, Rick. Oh yeah, there we go. Cool. Yep. blackviper.com. Very cool. It looks like a lot of people have their slides started already. Cool. So are there any other questions about this week's activities? We're going to get into coding next week. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think I'm going to log off. If you have watched until the very end, thank you so much for attending or watching this later. Please give me some feedback. What can I do better? Was the audio okay? Did the slides help? Did the demonstration in the browser help? Tell me what is good. Tell me what I can do better. You can send that in Slack. You can send it by email. Anything that you can do to help me improve this. I'm new to Twitch. I'm making it up as I go along with Twitch. I think it worked really well, though. I think this was fun. So I will talk to you all later.